Not with me.
John, look at my phone.
Well,
Look at my phone.
oh shit. Can I pick it up?
No.
No? Okay. Dude, that is wild. Have you ever picked that up?
Yeah, I told you I had before.
Yes, yeah, that's right. They're asking what? They're asking what
You can
happened.
tell him it's okay.
It just gave me chills. So, Brian's mother passed away. He's been getting phone calls from her. And he just got one now.
What you just heard was the moment our friend Brian received a phone call in March of 2025 from his mother. His mother passed away in the winter of 2024. Wait until you hear the full message. Welcome to Splintered Spirits, a podcast hosted by me, Gary, and my nephew Johnny from Santa Paranormal, where we try to prove his theory that ghosts are the fractured memories of the living. If you've been listening or if you follow John, you know he communicates with spirits using what many in the paranormal field consider to be controversial: phone apps. Spirits manipulate the device to create speech from digital radio and/or electromagnetic waves. But what if spirits didn't use the app to talk to us? What if they simply dial us on the phone and leave a message? Our guest this week, Professor Callum Cooper, author of Telephone Calls from the Dead, walks us through this very specific type of electronic voice phenomena, or EVP, and gives us some emotionally poignant advice on how to approach a call from a loved one that's passed, like Brian's did. Let's dive into the conversation. John, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
All right, man. So we've got we got a
very
big episode.
powerful one today.
We've got a big episode today.
This is definitely hits close to home.
We're gonna get going. We're gonna dive into this conversation, and our guest today, he is one of the leading voices at the intersection of science and the unexplained. Professor Callum Cooper is a chartered psychologist, a senior lecturer at the University of Northampton, and an internationally recognized author and researcher. With advanced degrees in psychology education and research methods, he has spent his career exploring what happens when science meets subjects like death, bereavement, human consciousness, and yes, the paranormal. He sits on the council of the Society for Psychical Research, serves as a scientific advisor to both the Forever Family Foundation and the Windbridge Research Center, and has earned numerous awards for his contributions to skeptical activism and science communication. His groundbreaking book, Telephone Calls from the Dead, which is this right here for our fans, Telephone Calls from the Dead, and we'll put a link to this in all of our bios for anyone out there listening. This book explores one of the most fascinating frontiers in afterlife research, which is unexpected calls from those no longer living. And today he's joining us to help make sense of one such call that one of our friends to the pod and to John's socials has received. So with that, we want to welcome Professor Cal Cooper. Professor
Hello.
Cooper, how are you?
Welcome.
I don't know if
Hi,
you could
John.
hear that. I don't know if you could hear that intro. Could you hear us when we were talking, or was it off?
Yeah, but flattered. I was blushing. Thank you very much.
Well, wonderful. I'm glad. Thank you so much for being here. And I forgot, I should add here, by the way, this is a super handsome gentleman. It's like, John, I feel like in the paranormal space, we've got to up our game.
Yeah, for real.
All those list of accomplishments, would you have expected to see someone so young? I would not. It's like, it's crazy.
You just got to keep battling on. If you want something, go get it.
Fair enough, man.
That's it.
So, Cal, listen, I like to start everything off with on this podcast with a basic question here on Splintered Spirits, and it's this: what do you think spirits are, and what happens when we die?
Well, that's quite a big one. Yeah. What are spirits? Well, people have believed that there's this essence that may leave the human body at the point of death and survives on in some way that we can either experience or interact with or communicate with. And this is what people define as spirits. And that's what it would be if it were to be an actual thing that we had, concrete evidence for. It's an aspect of personality and consciousness leaving the body and surviving in some way.
Do you believe
So
that?
I accept that there's good evidence for it. I'm a scientist, and this
Yeah.
question has come up so much recently. I think because I've been dealing with it for a good 20 years now, about do you actually believe in the things that you're studying? Well, it's not about whether I believe or don't believe. I'm interested in the evidence. So I say, well, what if I was a midwife? What if I was into geography? What if I was into chemistry? Would really most people come to me and say, do you actually believe in this kind of process of birthing, like birthing pools? Do you believe in birthing pools, or do you believe in these kinds of rock formations, or well, it's about evidence for it being good or evidence for its existence and so forth. So when it comes to parapsychology, how good is the evidence for telepathy? People, of course, experience it all the time because they talk about it. Whether it is actually that kind of process, a mind-to-mind interaction or not, people can relate to that kind of experience, the same as ghosts. So how good is the evidence for it? So my job as a psychologist is to look at what we already know of psychology and what could explain it without jumping to an explanation we don't have a process for. And then if that explanation doesn't apply, can we entertain this idea that it's a new process and it might be a mind-to-mind interaction and something might be leaving the mind while we're living to gain information, or even beyond bodily death? So I'm all about how good is the evidence. I have no vested interest, as much as that might sound weird. I'm fascinated by the topic, but I'm all for the data either being explained away, which would be great, or the data showing that something new is there to be learned.
Love it. I love that answer. I really do. And your work, it bridges science and spirituality, obviously,
Mm.
right? When we're talking
Mhm.
about, so how do your peers in academia respond to your research in parapsychology?
Well, all my peers at the University of Northampton, especially, that they're all parapsychologists pretty much. We've got a very large department within psychology. I think there's probably 40 of us, and some of those are counseling psychologists and psychotherapists. And we've got three main research departments within psychology dealing with counseling and positive psychology and child and adolescent mental health. And then the other one is a group called EECS, Exceptional Experiences and Consciousness Studies. So that's parapsychologists, transpersonal psychologists, consciousness study researchers, cognitive psychologists, and neuroscientists. So 5 different domains, all under one roof, looking at unusual experiences. So every day I'm surrounded by people doing the same thing as me. I'm just leading some things. I lead the 3rd year module, and I'm supervising a lot of doctorates in that area as well. And even at the Californian Institute for Human Science, I'm co-director of parapsychology education with Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove. So in all of my kind of main work, I'm with parapsychologists. So my peers are all for it and think, we're doing groundbreaking work here.
Why is psychology like that? Why is that the role that seems to be the closest to paranormal events? You know what I mean? Like, what is that role and that connection with those two things?
Some would argue not. Like the weekend before last, I was with Professor Bernard Carr, and he's one of the vice presidents of the Society for Psychical Research. He was one of Professor Stephen Hawking's students, doctoral students, and naturally he's a physicist. So he believes that many of these experiences could have something to do with multiverse and are actually more of an aspect of physics than they are of psychology. But still, we're dealing with human experiences. You've got a human who has had an experience who reports their experiences, so you can't not deal with psychology in the mix. But is their experience due to misperception or new perceptions we don't fully understand the processes for, or are they just witnessing aspects of physics that make it seem like they're having a telepathic experience, a precognitive experience, or seeing, visions of the dead, or sometimes visions of living people who are verified to have not been at those places at the time they were reported. They were elsewhere, like miles and miles away. So their physics has an interesting part to play. But the paranormal is approached by a number of different disciplines. I've got colleagues here in the UK that have specialized in it from the point of sociology, from anthropology, from the media, and especially how the media portray the data and the kinds of shows that get put out there and how best to put programs together to actually give, interesting portrayals, history, philosophy, theology, you name it. You can approach parapsychology from so many different angles. It's quite the tool, really, for kind of placing itself with other sciences and arts to actually explore why people embrace these experiences, find them fascinating, whether they believe in them or not, and explore what they really mean to us as human beings.
John, I saw you light up when you said like multiverse dimensions. That's something you talk about, like you don't know, and
All the
it's like
time.
you believe in it.
All the time.
So
You know?
Cal, I don't, for John here, I think I told you. So John's my nephew, and he has gotten quite popular on TikTok over the years, for many, many years, doing other controversial things, which is like he uses spirit boxes and phone apps, talking to spirits at grave sites, which many people have always said don't have spirits there. And we're familiar with how we know the spirit box thing is very controversial, and people have their doubts and everything else. And I've seen all the copycats. My fascination with John here is that the responses he gets is less about the words used, but the personality behind the words used and the
Mhm.
Q&A that he has going on there. And that's what I just find like it's bananas, right? Um, when he's talking to spirits. And that's sort of this idea of talking to spirits. I think, when I heard about your book, telephone calls from the dead, how did you get into that? Like, what was the catalyst that sort of led you down that path?
I think it was two or three things. One, I was reading books by I don't know if you can see him there. No, I've moved him. Oh, you can see Eileen Garrett just there.
Yeah.
But Scott Rogo's over there as well. So D. Scott Rogo. I was reading books by him and Raymond Bayless when I was an undergraduate doing psychology at the University of Northampton. And Scott Rogo and Raymond Bayless had done forwards for each other's books now and then. And I was just buying loads of their books at the time on eBay and Amazon, and they were going for next to nothing. Because this is before I kind of repopularized what they were doing. So I was finding them quite cheap because no one was reading any of their material particularly.
Sure.
And I got one book out of the library called Apparitions and Survival of Bodily Death by Raymond Bayless. Read it from cover to cover while I was in the kitchen in the halls of residence and doing my washing in the laundry room. And, you're waiting for your clothes to tumble dry. And I was just captivated page after page. And I thought, this is really well written. It's really accessible writing. And it's also very knowledgeable. This guy knows his literature. And he was, I think, the librarian for the Southern Californian Society for Psychical Research. And they were both members of both the American and British SPR. So I kept looking for their books, and then I found one titled Phone Calls from the Dead from 1979. And I bought a copy of that and just threw it on the pile of the other books because I just thought, well, there must be stuff like that written all the time, and I just never bothered to look. Then MSN News, as was my main way of looking at news at the time, reported a train collision in California with a guy called Charles Peck being on one of these commuter trains, and there was a freight train coming the other way, and it was so big it was causing live news reports for the recovery of people that were on the train and what had happened. And apparently his family were reporting repeated phone calls from his mobile phone. They knew nothing of the train collision. And when they picked up the phone, they were getting static. And when they phoned back, it either went straight to voicemail or they just got nothing. So when they saw on the news that it was the very train he was traveling back on, they thought he was trapped in the wreckage. So when they got calls, his wife, his son, his daughter, they were shouting, don't worry, Dad, the rescuers are coming, they're on their way. I think they'd actually got in touch with the rescue team and said, our father keeps calling from his phone. He must be trapped in there. So apparently they started working extra hard to try and find him. It was by about 3:30 in the morning, so 3:30 a.m., they found his body. Apparently he'd died on first impact, and they never recovered his phone. For me, as a psychologist, and even a budding one then, I was an undergraduate, I thought, well, the phone's been smashed, it's trapped in the wreckage, it's just repeatedly calling the last people in the call register. He's on his way home, so it's going to be his wife, his son, his daughter. That's where he's heading. That's most likely the last people that he contacted. The fact that it was never found is no mystery. There must be so many things that in that collision just got smashed, thrown, were never recovered. But is the fact that the family took comfort in believing it was a phone call from the dead. The media pushed it as a phone call from the dead. So I thought, well, what's in this book that I've just thrown on the pile from 1979? That was 2009. So what's in this book? And I read it cover to cover. And my goodness, there were full-blown conversations recorded of 10, 20 minutes with people that the next day were found to have been dead a week or a couple of weeks or something like that. That's completely different. You're actually interacting with this person who is verified to have been dead for some time. And then following up with how the telephone works, whether there was a record with the telephone companies. and things like that. So that's what got me interested. I started doing a few articles on it, even text messages from the dead, because text messages have become a new thing. And I found that there were some news reports regarding that. And I think by about late 2010, a friend of mine in Portsmouth on the south coast of the UK put me in touch with a publisher, and he said, you should really take all your articles, get some more material together. You should really kind of do a sort of a second volume to the original book. So Telephone Calls from the Dead really acts as a follow-on, because I talk about Rogo and Bayliss, but then I talk about where are we now.
No, yeah, I read it, and it's so. What if in all the cases you found, what have you found how do you distinguish between what is, a psychological projection, a coincidence, or a grief hallucination, in these respects, or in something genuinely anomalous, like how do you do that?
So what would be most likely down to conventional explanations? There's a lot where people say they woke up to the sound of ringing phones, believe their phone had lit up and someone had died at that time, or they got a text message but there was no sender information connected, and then the next day they find that someone has passed away, or it's close to the time that someone's died. There's all these ones where there's little bits of coincidences that seem like those comforting signs of, well, your friend's passed away and you've gone to sit in the garden and a robin lands next to you, or white feathers suddenly start appearing, or you kick your shoes off and you hear some change land on the floor and it's a few pennies and things like that, and you think, well, I don't leave spare change lying around. Where's that come from? But then you start to make this link between the person that you've lost. So they're very kind of small coincidences, but you're making a meaningful link between them. So those, I would argue, there could be a number of conventional explanations where we could say, how many times has that happened and you've not noticed it and not drawn a link because no one's died? So it's just another daily occurrence. Oh, excellent. I found a quarter on the floor. Brilliant. Stick it in the pocket. You don't think about it. It's just great. You found some extra change.
Right.
But no one's died. But the fact that, someone's died and then you think a quarter's fallen from the ceiling, that becomes more significant.
This man's after my heart, by the way. You're after my heart. You look good. You're talking my language.
This is
stop that.
Yeah. I tell you, you got to see, because Cal, it's like, John will jump in here when we get to the story, certainly for a lot more, but it's like on his he's mainly a live streamer, so most people are constantly digging into him about his beliefs and like, this is this, or this is what a spirit. He's like, you don't know that. Could be a coincidence. He's the most skeptical of anybody doing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in all of your studies, the things that you've seen, Cal, are there common patterns across some of these cases where it really starts to point to something real happening beyond chance or error? Like, what would you say,
Yeah, so some of those cases start to push the boundaries beyond it. We could even talk about some of the ones from living people. So Scott Rogo had one himself, where there were intention calls. And you think, again, is this a memory thing? But then again, we've got some interaction here. So one of his it was 10 o'clock on a bright Thursday morning, and I was thinking about making a call to a colleague of mine at the UCLA Neuropsychiatric Institute. Although I thought about making that call, I never actually did. But by 4 o'clock that afternoon, I got the surprise of my life when I got a call from the research assistant of the very psychologist I'd thought about calling. He said he was answering my message. When I asked what in blazes he was talking about, he said that at 10 o'clock that morning, a call had come into them. The caller had left my name, my number, and asked that the call be returned. And yet he's adamant he never actually made that call. Sure. Sometimes a whole conversation could take place as well. So that pushes the boundaries. And also when you have got someone who, you take the phone call and say, oh, it's Auntie Mary on the phone. She's called to say happy birthday to me. Isn't it lovely? Does anyone else want to chat with her? And you pass the landline phone around. So you've all spoken to her. And the next day you find out that she died a week prior. So you've got multiple witnesses, you've got a conversation taking place. It's something you could follow up with the phone company. In some of the instances Rogo and Bayliss had, there was no record of that call taking place at that time, yet all other ones were logged. And so that's why Rogo and Bayliss also started to think, maybe if these are paranormal communications, they're taking place inside the phone, not through the phone line and phone system. It's the device itself that's being manipulated somehow. So those start to really push the boundaries of conventional explanations. And you asked about categories. They did find categories, they found themes. So those that might be more conventional are where you're grieving, you're at home alone, the phone rings, you hear a word, a voice, a name, sound of static, and you think that's that person. Or Could even just be someone going, "Mum, Dad." Well, if you've lost a child, you know, that could be enough to satisfy you that you've had a communication. But hands up, how many people are called mum and dad? There's a lot of people around the world called mum and dad. And so it could be a missed number. The kid suddenly hears this person wailing and crying over the phone. They put the phone down without apologizing or saying, sorry, I think I've got the wrong number. So for the receiver of the call, they've had the satisfaction in communication with their alleged deceased child. But it could go beyond that. So that's a simple call, just the words and phrases, no response. Type 2 are prolonged, speaking for 10, 20 minutes. After the call, you discover that person has died. Type 3 are answer calls. You make the call and have a long conversation with someone that afterwards you find out is dead, or a long conversation with someone who afterwards you find out was nowhere near a telephone to have taken that call. And you find that out because of meeting up with them or speaking to someone else saying they weren't home that day. You know, that they've been out of house for a week because they've been away on holiday, but you called their landline and yet someone answered their phone with their name, voice characteristics, knowledge. They answered the phone call that you made. The final type that Rogo and Bayless had were those intention calls. You intend to make a call, you change your mind, it still takes place for the other person. And when I looked at these cases, I found that some of them would be a mixture of type 1 and type 2. So you could know someone was dead and yet repeatedly have calls from them, and sometimes extended conversation.
And
Very
those
rare,
but those are the most common, right? Like that's
no.
Those are the most rare.
No, those are rare to know someone's dead and repeatedly have calls from them.
Got it. Type 1 and 2 could be okay.
Type 1 and type 2 are the more common ones. Type 1, the most common.
That's what I meant. Type 1 and type 2 are the most common in your book, and then it was like, wasn't there like a type 5 that you thought?
So yeah, I split it into. I kind of shifted there. So they had 4. So simple, prolonged, answer, and intention. And I moved one category up to put a 4th one in. It was mixed calls. So the first 4 are all related to the dead, and the 5th one, the intention calls, are just related to the living. So I sandwiched mixed calls in as 4th place.
Have you now, dude? What's something that's given you complete chills in your research where you're like, that's a fucking ghost and that's real shit? Like, is there anything you could point to that was like, all right, that tell me.
I was gonna ask 2 things. That's very similar to what I was gonna ask.
Go for it. Ask quick.
What piece of evidence, what piece of data, and not like coincidental data, like hardcore data makes you go, I'm gonna continue researching this, as a forefront to what I'm doing, and a priority, if you will.
I suppose there's 2 in recent times that I really like. One was in my book, and it was a mixed call, and I think it was maybe from my early articles. A guy reached out to me and said that he was aware of parapsychology when he was doing his doctorate, because one of his supervisors had written a textbook on it, but didn't really teach on it. He just dabbled, and he was aware when Bob Morris took on the Coercler parapsychology chair at the University of Edinburgh. He was a parapsychologist from California, saw that there was this opportunity to take on a professorship of parapsychology, and he won it over other people when Edinburgh took it on. And this guy said that he got this passing interest, and it made him think of a childhood experience. He knew of the Rogo and Bayless book. My articles had clearly sparked his interest again. So I called him Dr. Jones, and he said that when he was about 11, 12, maybe a bit older, his parents had split up, but they were still living amicably under the same roof for the sake, I guess, of finances and so forth. But they were just off doing their own thing. I think their parents had like separate living rooms and stuff, so they could just come and go and make sure the kids are okay until maybe something made it more convenient to go their separate ways. The mother had rekindled a friendship with a childhood sweetheart, and they mainly spoke over the phone. I think I call him Richard in the book. And so 2 to 3 times a week, she'd take the kitchen phone that got the long cord on it, and she'd go off into another room and shut the door and have these 10, 15-minute conversations. And this went on for weeks and weeks and weeks. Then Richard ended up in hospital and was poorly, and then found out that he passed away. A couple of weeks go by, telephone rings in the kitchen. She goes to answer it, is away 10, 15 minutes, and she comes back and she's white as a sheet. And everyone says, well, what's wrong? And she said, Richard's just called. And then it happens again and again 2 to 3 times a week. These calls come through just as they did when he was living, and she goes and has these conversations. Now, one time she goes out shopping around the time that these calls would come through. And Dr. Jones, because he later became a doctor in the social sciences, he said as this young boy, he thought, well, what do I do? The phone's ringing. He goes to answer it, and he hears the sound of just shh and whooshing and the sound of wind, and as though something was about to make a noise on the phone. And he didn't know what it was. He just shouted, she's not here, and slams the phone back down. And he said in later life, he wishes he just held on to find out, well, what exactly is it that Mum was listening to? Who was she speaking to? And he had to wait for years and years and years to actually find out. So around the time that he contacted me, which is about 2009, 2010, I think she passed away the year before, somewhere around there. So late noughties. And he managed to get hold of her diaries that they were still in storage. She kept diaries that would hold like 3 years at a time. And he found that period of time and thought, what on earth were these conversations? And it's just bizarre. So yes, everyone's witnessing a telephone ringing. Yes, she's going away for a conversation. But these diary accounts say, Monday morning, my darling called to say that he loved me and would always be at my side. He says he comes on the wind to speak to me and make sure that I am safe. I have trouble sleeping. He says, now you will sleep. Goodbye, my darling. I love you. I'll be back to speak with you soon. Tuesday afternoon, my darling calls to say that he loves me and is still at my side. On and on and on and on for 3 years or so. Apparently the calls just faded out. So either someone was aware that Richard had died and they wanted to prank her because of some sort of fallout. It's a long-standing prank where someone has committed themselves 2 to 3 times a week to have these long-winded conversations with her that apparently have some audible anomalies in them, the static sound and wind, and she's taken by them, or something else is going on. So we've got these diary accounts, we've got his eyewitness account, and something that stuck with him for ages, so much so that it got him into psychology. But ultimately, who knows?
I would have ripped that phone straight off the wall, thrown it
So
straight into the garbage.
Let me give you the other one. Let me give you the other one that's
Yeah.
so we've got a program over here called Uncanny that's hosted by Danny Robbins,
Yeah.
and it's on
Yep.
the BBC, it's on iPlayer, and it's on BBC Radio 4 when people listen to it live. It's toured as a theatre thing. We've had the Uncanny Con as well, and I go on sometimes as a guest expert. So I was in Series 2 and Series 4, which was Uncanny USA, and now it's coming back for Series 5. But one of the early telephone episodes I wasn't involved in. My colleague, Dr. Kieran O'Keefe, was, and it's called Harry Called. So there's this guy called Will who was a student at university, and he was with his friends, and they're all doing a Ouija board. And he thinks it's nonsense. And he sits to one side and watches them doing it. And they ask, have you got a message for anyone? And it says yes. And they said, well, what's your name? And it spells out Harry. Okay. Who's the message for? WILL. And Will just said, I've had enough now. Just stop. I'm really not interested in this. This is really silly. And he goes back to his halls of residence where he stays with the other students. Now, at that time, there was a payphone at the end of the corridor if you wanted to receive calls or call home to your family. And if you were out, everyone had a piece of paper on their respective room. So you could just pencil on, your mum's called at this time, leave messages there. And he goes back and there's a message on the piece of paper that says, Harry called. And so he asks around everyone and said, who's taken this? And he thinks it's his friends in the other place that were messing about with the Ouija board that have already called ahead and left this to creep him out. And his friends later said, no, we didn't do that. And everyone on the corridor says, we didn't leave that. And then this happens again and again. He'd come back with a message left on his door saying Harry called. And then one time he was in his room and someone said, there's someone on the phone for you. They say their name's Harry. And he goes running to the phone, picks it up. And he said there was a voice there. It was a man. And he said this was the early 1990s, but his voice and his characteristics were out of this time. It was like he was from a completely different time period. And he was just rambling on. I can't really remember what it was he was saying, but it was just talking and talking and talking. And so this led to more calls, and then eventually him waking in the middle of the night to see an elderly man stood in his room that he thought was this vision of this person, Harry. So these all built and built and built. And that one has become a favorite episode for Uncanny. People found it so creepy that these calls just became so persistent. There were other ones, just like with Poltergeist 2, people had reports of Fisher-Price ring telephones and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
some really unusual ones.
I wonder why that old man was really into Will, dude. It's creepy in and of itself, even after
Could be
death.
any reason.
You know, who
So,
knows?
so Professor, let me ask you a question. Is there enough data for rendition number 3 of your book?
Yeah, I mean, there's loads. I mean, I've got even just a folder just down by the bookcase over there. I've been gathering so much
That's awesome.
that I want to do a new analysis. One of my colleagues, who's a French sociologist, he in his own book, there is a French Phone Calls from the Dead book that's written by Laurent Kasparix, and he looked at about 25 cases or so, I think. But he sent those over. We're going to do it as an English, even though the book's out, I'm going to write it up as an English paper for the Journal of the Society of Psychical Research. So that's out. We're going to collaborate on that. But I've got more on the history and other things like that, and more cases have come in that I'll do another book that's not written. I mean, this is written like a research report. It takes you through my process of analysis, but I'll do a more casual one that's more about what have I found since then and what's some of the more unique history. We've also, I'm probably a few months away from finishing it. If you remember in my book, I wrote about an old-fashioned telephone, people creating them in the 1920s to contact the dead. And there was one by someone called F.R. Melton, Frederick Reginald Melton, who was based here in Nottingham. And I found so many things probably a couple of years ago in the local newspaper reports about him that I thought, well, you know, that pamphlet that he made, a psychic telephone, as it was called, instructions to build such a device, it was very scarce. I found it as a photocopy in the Californian Institute for Integral Studies Rockefeller Library in Rogo's archive. And then I saw a university in the United States a year or so ago had also got a copy, and they digitized the whole thing and put it up for everyone to see. I thought, I thought it was unique. But
that's like straight out of Ghostbusters, man, where it's like they find the blueprints for the building and realize it's it's an antenna for you know what I mean? And it's like this guy built a ghost phone straight from having everybody build it.
They are out there. The instructions are out there. But I thought what we could do with my original publishers, who did Tricon Books, they said, oh, this would be great as like a little pocket-sized book. So we're going to reprint the original instructions, but the first half of the book will be an introduction by me to who was F.R. Melton and how reliable was he as a figure, because he seems quite a suspicious character. The newspaper reports say that he'd faked his own death at one point to escape his family. He'd not been paying child maintenance. He'd been arrested for being a political activist. And then this person claims they built a telephone to contact the dead.
Oh, dude, you're gonna John, you got to get these plans. You got to build this.
Yeah, I know.
This screams you. This screams you to do it.
Yeah, I know. I'm thinking about it.
So yes, more books to come. More books.
All right, so
awesome.
All right,
that's so cool.
All right, I want to bring Brian. So
are we doing this? We're doing this.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Professor, this is gonna get crazy.
It's
okay.
Yeah, and he'll probably look. This
Brian,
is a real. So Brian
come on down.
So John, you set the stage of what a mod is and everything else, and then
okay. So I do streams on TikTok and YouTube, and I have moderators. They are people that are part of my community that I trust to help me moderate the stream from trolls and whatnot and all that. So this is one of my, good friends. He is, one of my mods. He's been with me for years. His background in, military and everything else, he's got an extensive background. This is Brian. Okay.
Hi, Brian.
And should I get into the whole where we were and what we were doing and all that?
Well, I think we have to understand what Brian, tell us about your mom, Brian, real quick, so we understand when that happened, and then.
Okay. My mom passed away Christmas Eve morning at 2:11 in the morning in 2024. She was very sick. She was diabetic. 5 years ago, she lost her leg. Was amputated because of an infection, and she got another infection in her right leg while she was in the nursing home. And a long story short, it just went right through her body. She was septic. She was in ICU for the last like 3 or 4 weeks. And, I got a call. I was living out of state. I was living here in Pennsylvania, or not here, sorry. I was living in Pennsylvania. She was in a nursing home in Florida. I could never move her because she wasn't stable enough. And then I got the phone call about 2:30 in the morning that she had passed. you know, and I waited and told John the next day, and yeah, so it was, you know, it's hard. I lost both my parents now, so.
So, and you know, when I first met Brian we were doing, we were just having a chat online, doing one of our episodes, and he was telling us that he gets phone calls from her. And this is what led me to you, Cal. It was like, this is a thing. Like, is this a thing? And apparently it is. And remember, we had talked about that, Brian. We were all online, and you were telling us that this happens to you, and it's crazy. So now, John, set the scene in Indiana, what you were doing. I'm going to play you the tape where this
So
call.
we're at it's a famous haunted spot out in Indiana called the Randolph County Infirmary. And at this point, you've already received how many phone calls?
3.
3. So at this point, he's already 3 phone calls in since 2024.
The first one, was in the end of December.
Was at the end of December, so only a couple weeks after your brother passed. Okay, so we're
And
now
this is the end of March, right? March 23rd, I think.
Yeah. This is at the end of March. So we're sitting in the attic, which used to be an old courtroom, because this place had multiple purposes. And yeah, I got the spirit boxes going. I got everything charging up because the stream, battery gets eaten quick. And a few moments before the phone call, a spirit comes through and says, "Your mother is calling." And I was using an app called Vox, which was the one I was using at the time, and it says, "Your mother is calling." Now, none of us thought anything of it because there's a lot of spirit chatter, a lot of different things are being said. If it's not viable and it's not flowing with the conversation, I'm ignoring it. So we ignored it because it made no sense to what was going on. And then as Brian's sitting right next to me, the phone call comes through.
So I'm going to play it. I have it. Oh, really? The image is just static because John's got his camera facing out into this empty room. But it's really the audio that we're really paying attention to. So I'm going to jump over and just say, just so you can see what's going on.
Some had lights in them. Mom's on the phone. Patch her through. I'm not sure.
Let me start that again real quick, guys, because it's always a little tricky when I do this video. It like jumps on its own. But
I'm not sure.
let me turn the volume all the way up.
Some had lights in them. Mom's on the phone. Patch her through. Not with me.
John,
Just a few moments later.
look at my phone.
Well,
Look at my phone.
oh shit. Can I pick it up?
No.
No? Okay. Dude, that is wild. Have you ever picked that up?
Yeah, I told you I had before.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Dude, that's wild, bro.
Thing happened.
To come.
That's wild. Holy
Why?
shit.
Now see what I'm saying?
Wow. So, they're asking what? They're asking what
You can
happened.
tell them it's okay.
So, Brian's mother passed away recently, like very recently. And Brian, this is your dude. Either someone's, bro, I don't know if you want to read that text message. Either somebody is fucking with you,
Yes.
or
This and
And a lab.
no, you gotta read it. You gotta read it. If you don't want to continue the conversation afterwards, I understand.
No,
We could talk in private.
this.
Tradition.
All right, so you could see that happened live. He received a call, and then there was a voice to text, on the phone that does it. Now, Brian, what were those when you've gotten calls in the past? Did you ever answer it?
I've only answered the first one, and it was it was just straight like static. There was nothing, I couldn't hear any voices, and it was just static. You know, nothing more than that.
And that
And
was
then,
from your mum's phone.
yes, because I had my mom's phone. Because
So just here,
Oh,
just real
sorry.
quick, I'll speed this up. Just so you know, the phone is active.
Yeah.
The phone is still intact. It remains off and in your drawer.
Right.
Just so those details. So there's still service connected to it. You know, it can still receive calls and make calls. You know, it hasn't been taken off. It's it's still paid for. So, but it's off and in his drawer for the most part.
Yeah, nobody else has that number. So
Okay.
Now, here's the message. And what's really interesting about it is the voice to text is different than the message that comes through. But I'm going to play it. Brian, here we go.
Brian, this is your mom. Can you give me a call, please, when you can? Okay, I love you. Bye.
So that was the message. And then this is the transcription. It says, Brian, this is your mom. Can you call me and let me know what's going on, please? It doesn't matter. But it doesn't matter when, but please give me a call. I love you. Bye-bye. And that's what came through on the text, on the voice to text from the message, right? That the phone does.
Mm-hmm. Is that
But what
actually
came through on
is that
that-
actually, Brian, your mother's voice? That's your mother's voice.
yes, it is.
You're right.
Yeah, that's her. It's like John and I talked about, because I didn't listen to it until I was with John.
Yeah.
You know, being my friend and everything. And the long story short, it just sounded like when she was younger. Like I remember her when she was younger.
Mm.
You know, like John brought up, you know, no pain in her voice. She sounded good, you know. So it's not like when she was in the ICU or anything like that.
Mm.
And I'm just
And she was also, her mind was starting to go as well.
Right.
And you could hear it in her voice. But in that message,
You can't.
it sounds like she's,
It sounds like
doing
any
chores
other.
in the house and picking up her phone to call her son.
Yeah.
So, Cal, what jumps out at you first in terms of tone, timing, voice?
Well, you place me at a crossroads, really, as to whether, in this moment I act as parapsychologist and you want me to explore conventional explanations. I mean, this is a very recent thing for Brian.
Yeah.
It's very impactful. Even I'm feeling it from listening to that and hearing the backstory. It's still very fresh.
Yeah.
And, Brian, you say you've lost also both your parents as well. And that's a big thing for anyone to go through and know that you're now the next step in the next generation. So, I either have the secondary role, which is clinical parapsychologist, in that I can tell you all the things about other people's experiences and the fact that these naturally have a big benefit for us and a purpose in helping with grieving and coping. And it's more beneficial to have these experiences than it is to not, because when you don't, people try and turn to other grief work to try and cope and move forward. People find them very special and they revel in their kind of exceptional nature and think this is great. You're lucky if you have one. So some people might have more than one. Some people might just have something that's more on that symbolic level, but this is very direct and seeming like this person is, contacting you directly over the phone in some way. There's a number of things that jump to my mind, but I think for the purpose of a podcast like this, I don't want to break it down. This is something that I have to, as a parapsychologist and psychologist, think, well, Brian, if you wanted a one-to-one and we talked through whatever direction you wanted, do you really want conventional explanations for this? Or do you want to know more about the kind of therapeutic side? That's what we go down. So that's more the position that I would say at this point in time is to, I could go one or the other. I find it compelling. I find the timing compelling. And I understand how impactful that could be. And this is exactly what we're talking about in terms of what these experiences can be like for people. That's the fact that you've got a voicemail like that is very compelling. But I've got ideas here as to what it could be. But I also know what kind of impact this is having as well.
Is it, I don't know if you want to answer this based on what you just said, but is it like from a scientific perspective, and I'm not we're not trying to debunk anything here, but is it worth it for us to go to like an audio forensics to see what that is, or is it like what would you?
No,
You know,
my opinion is that's a genuine voicemail. But I've got other ideas attached to it. There's no need to. I see on some ghost hunting shows and stuff when they're going out and they've got a dictaphone in the hand and they're walking around with it and their hands all over it and there's all kind of muffled sounds and stuff and people are trying to make sense of the random sound and then they start to refine it through some sort of editing process. Well, that's not how EVP was ever done. It was reel-to-reel recorders. It was clarity of sound. It was soundproof boxes, and yet on playback there were bangs, scratches, noises, voices, which you should not get, from the clarity of fresh reel-to-reels or cassette tapes, and also with it being in a soundproof box. So this idea of walking around with one where you're creating all kinds of audible anomalies from your hands and everything else in the building, it creates chaos. That's a very clear-cut voicemail. You don't need to run that through anything. If Brian says that's his mother's voice, it sounds very clearly like a woman, and I understand every word that was said. It's Brian's mum's voice.
Wild.
And what's really wild, because again, I like to, not debunk, but look at things from a more logical perspective, especially when it comes to the paranormal. I've had, and we've all had this, and this can't be denied. You've had issues with your cell phones where people leave a message, and even if you check that message, it comes in again, and it comes in again. It comes in again. What's unique with Brian is that even after he checks these messages, they keep coming and they're different. And what's really wild is the fact that they're not old. Like, this isn't a message that he's gotten before from his mom. It's a new one, and it's new every time. So I can sit here and nitpick too on what exactly it could be or whatnot. But what I said to Brian was, how awesome is it that, of course, horrible, your mother passed away, horrible, but nobody gets these chances. That's to hear your mother's voice again and to hear it clear, not in pain, not in distress, just normal, is amazing in itself. And that goes into what you were talking about, Professor, about the therapeutic side of it, which is, in my opinion, beautiful.
People revel in it, and when they see apparitions at the end of the bed, they'll say the person looked glowing, radiant, free of pain. Or sometimes if it's a friend, they looked younger than the point at which I first knew them. I met them in their 30s. They looked like they were just coming out of their teens or early 20s. They seem like they're full of life and they're good. So that in itself, that you've got the communication, which is one that changes that person's worldview about life and death and continuity thereafter. But also this idea of this person being okay. You might have seen them in not such an okay situation at the end, that the whole thing's reversed and this person is free and they're looking down over me, and maybe I might have another experience again, but even just one is significant enough. And that's if we're totally leaving this parapsychological side of what's the explanation here. Have we got a conventional one that fits, psychology, physics, electronics, and what we know about all of those mushed together? Or does nothing seem to fit and we've got something new to explore? Right now, with Brian's case, unless Brian want to explore this further, I would say let's look at the impact of this. And that's very impactful. It's very clear what's going on. For everyone listening, it's very clear what's going on. And the story is very clear as well. How impactful is that? It's remarkable if you just take it as it is and think of, well, would I sooner have that in the grieving process or just nothing at all? I think many of us would want a little something like that and a little nod and a wink, an actual voicemail message. If you just want to leave it as that and not dig for the explanation, take it as it is.
Yeah. Now, Professor, let me ask you a question.
Brian, thank you for sharing that too, by the way, man.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, so much. I can clearly see how much that's impacting you even now. So the fact that you wanted to share it in this kind of forum as well, thank you. And hopefully you feel positive about it, and these are kind of good experiences when you do have them. You're not finding them scary or anything like that, or finding them a negative to moving forward with your life. But please don't think that there's no one to speak to. As I say, I come from a whole department of parapsychologists and counseling psychologists who are both, and there's all kinds of networks as well to actually understand these experiences more, as well as learning more about yourself moving forward. These aren't signs of psychosis in the vast majority of cases. Varieties of people all around the world have these kinds of experiences. They're cross-cultural, and they're more common than not. I think it's up to like some surveys have said around 70% of people can relate to some form of experience post-loss. So they're very, very common. So you're one of the fortunate to get something as impactful as a voicemail message as your individual kind of sign. But yeah, if you want to explore it further, I'm here, and I can put you in contact with people as well if you want to talk to one and explore it further.
I'll make sure that you have his contact information, Brian, later. If
Yeah,
that.
definitely.
If that's
definitely.
something you want,
Again, Brian, thank you, man. Really appreciate it. I appreciate you so much. Professor, I have a question.
Go for it.
While all this was going on, did you know how you were bringing up the types, like type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4, and all those? Did you notice an uptick or a downtick in the types that were coming through via a landline, as opposed to now more, cell phones and smartphones?
Dude, it's so funny. That was my next question. Has technology made your work harder or
Yeah, I'm just
not?
curious if there was a change in the data with the types, or a decrease or an increase, or what the data look like. I mean, that's just fascinating.
So the simple answer is I don't have the kind of answer in terms of concrete stats because I was just finishing my master's degree as I finished writing that book. And so smart technology, smartphones were just becoming a thing. The iPhone was at 2007 when the first iPhone
Yeah,
really kind of
2007,
kicked off.
2006.
So I
something
started
like that.
writing on this 2 years later, and then another 2 years later, the book was done.
So the data didn't exist yet, basically.
No, there was a few telephone cases, there was a few answer phone cases, just like Brian's case, like that I'd heard of or I'd seen in newspaper reports, and a few text message cases. Most of my stuff was historical landlines or current day landlines, so it's still the basic landline technology, where whenever you dialed a number, it would kind of send a signal, and it would open the signal and close the signal. And so I even talked about, I love it when you see it in the film Red Dragon with Hannibal Lecter, and that they give him the telephone to a solicitor, and they put a plate over where the rotary dial would be, but he knows that he can just lift it up, press the the receiver down, and then tap it. So you could tap in the numbers, and you could call someone just by going 1 2 1 2 3 4 5 1. And then you could call someone that way. You wouldn't need the numbers. So it's very basic of opening the line and closing the line, and then it would find the telephone it needs to reach out to. This stuff is now way more sophisticated. You have got people started using them instantly as satellite navigation in their car. You were looking up things on the internet. Apps started to come in, so you could start to, get vouchers for things. If you've got Starbucks vouchers or other coffee shops or McDonald's or whatever, all these things built, and you're doing most of your things and your banking and everything else all through your phone, which is why people are devastated if they lose them. You've got your kids' pictures on there, you've got birthday parties, you've got significant events, you've got things you want to remember for later. Early on, when you just got a Nokia phone or something like that, you played Snake, you texted people, and you called people. And then later on, you could take a really fuzzy, crappy, pixelated picture, but it was still the best thing. Oh my God, you've got some form of camera to hand, because no one else is typically walking around with a camera on them. So since then, websites were being developed so you could send text messages anonymously, and they would go through to someone's phone, and then you'd start paying for them there afterwards. There is more space now for manipulating a call or a text message than there would have been with the landline. Rogo and Bayliss, even in 1979, only logged 2 instances they knew of voicemail messages, because the voicemail machine with the tiny reel-to-reel cassettes was only just starting to come in and was only just starting to be a popular thing. And thereafter, things like VHS players and people having home videos and things like that. So everything was new. So I also wrote the book on the cusp of smartphones coming in. So I was still dealing with relatively basic technology. So something I really need to explore more and see how much, if I do like a basic survey of people's experiences again, just more so for the sake of the numbers and gather some of the accounts as I do it, I can see, was it a landline? Was it a smartphone?
Yeah.
I only have like
Interesting.
two
Very cool.
two
Thank
more
you.
questions for you, man. And I really appreciate your time here with us today. And John, if you have anything else, by all means, jump in. But I guess it's like, you know, as we wrap this up, how do you feel with all of your research and as we're going in hearing this stuff, and sometimes the tech is getting clearer, more traceable, or it's getting worse with more deep fakes and things like that. But do you think we're getting closer to understanding how consciousness persists after death in your studies? Do you feel like you're progressing, you know, in understanding that?
You make an interesting point with deep fake and then AI. I mean, the amount of kind of fictional shows that have been made about, well, if we're using these all the time, we've got apps and so forth, then you could potentially have an app that's starting to, I mean, we even talk about our Alexas and things like that. Mine's probably woken up, having said that. She'll start singing or something. You know, they're getting your algorithms. They're like, they're seeing what you like and what you don't like, what music you're listening to and what you're not listening to, what you're ordering off of that popular website and what you're not ordering. And so it's building characteristics about you that other people could relate to. And you could say, well, that sounds like Gary's song list. It sounds like the kinds of things Gary would buy from that website. And the idea was in some of these fictional shows, well, it could record your conversations and your voice characteristics. So what if we had an app where after you've died, you go on the app and you say you want phone calls from, you know, your deceased friend, Stephen, and you could just ring it every time and have a pretend conversation that's all AI and it's doing a deep fake. It's just getting all the characteristics of Stephen and putting them together and creating a logical conversation. We could do that now to some extent with the technology that we have. Only a few years ago, it was a thing of fiction, but we were catching up to it. It's quite fun when you look at even sci-fi shows. I'm a big fan of the sitcom over here, Red Dwarf. And a lot of the things they said in that, and even in Star Trek, have become an actual reality of technology now, where, you know, years ago we thought, well, that's, you know, nonsense. And they're playing around with little bits of things the tech guys have put together, but they've become an actual thing. You know, having a conversation with someone, I'm on an iMac right now, and the screen is that thin. And that was, you know, something of fiction only, you know, so many years ago, but now it's an actual thing, and you can have a video conversation with someone on your phone. That was in Star Trek and all sorts. We've caught up, so the room for error is far greater now when it comes to things like that. I've waffled well away from your question there, Gary.
Yeah, a little bit, but does that define consciousness? You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Is it like, but because AI, you know, you could create.
Yeah, but I always say, because people always ask me with my stream, hey, when are you going to start incorporating language models? When are you going to start using AI to decipher what the spirits are saying? And there's all these new ITC apps popping out that deal with language models and AIs. My whole thing is, I have to look at it from a very bird's eye point of view. And what if spirits can manipulate the AI and we create something completely different? As sci-fi as it sounds, it's the truth. We don't understand, like, for example, we don't understand what and how your mother's spirit manipulated that phone. Right. We don't understand how they manipulate the devices I use or other people's devices. So who's to say that they're not going to take a language model and create something completely different with it? So we're trying to talk to, say, you know, Mike, you know, the spirit Mike. And in reality, that language model completely changes Mike into something else. And we don't know. We don't know how far the implications can go. So I see what you're saying, Professor. It's broad. It's, you know, it's the room for error, the room for manipulation is vast.
And that's why I don't think, even though I've written on it, and that's why we're having the conversation today, I don't think the telephones and the technology offer the best evidence for consciousness surviving death. So let me make a physical point. I can just grab it here. Hang on.
Sure.
So this, out of all the books I've got, this is the essays from the Bigelow competition in 5 volumes. I think there was like 206 successful essays that went through to be judged. So I think I'm in volume 5 with the essay that I was involved in. And it was $500,000 for the best evidence in 25,000 words for survival of permanent bodily death. And my colleague, Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove, he was the essay winner for that. He spoke about the telephones off the back of my research as part of his essay. But when it came to the one that I was involved in, didn't discuss any of that. My main two areas that I was asked to write with 3 other authors was best evidence from deathbed visions. So people dying on their deathbed over the last 150 years that we've kind of written on that topic. What are the best cases where it seems, how on earth did that dying person know about this other person who's come to them that's, you know, is dead, but they don't know they've died, and yet they've delivered such specific information that's had to be followed up. And also, what haunting cases throughout history have also offered the best evidence. So I spoke about 2 cases, but one that was memorable was the Cheltenham ghost. It was also known as the Morton ghost, and it's also sort of the basis for the film and stage play, The Woman in Black. Now, in that case, the apparition appeared so often that they could experiment with it. Morton, who was the main author of the paper, who was a medical student, she'd seen the apparition late one night and started putting fibre across the staircase so she could see if it would break the fibre. And they'd follow it around the house. It would appear in the garden. They tried to corner it and reach out and touch it. And they had so many opportunities to experiment with the apparition because it was appearing so often. These are really powerful cases that, if you see those green books over there, the Proceedings of the Society for Psychical Research, it was one of the early reports with a foreword by Frederick Myers, who was a massive scholar of the field, talking about the case. And then he wrote, you can see it in blue just there, the 2-volume book in 1903, Human Personality and its Survival of Bodily Death. A massive piece of work, especially on what is human consciousness? What does it mean to us? And has it got this capacity for surviving bodily death? What's the evidence for it? So I think all of these other kinds of cases that we have more regularly day to day, sensing the presence of the dead, seeing apparitions, seeing them in dreams, as much interaction as we like through people professing to be mediums, we can easily put those people to the test and see if they really can deliver specific information, really specific information, and see if this is offering us any more information about, well, you know, how powerful is human personality and can it actually survive? Or is something, traces of our memory at least, being retained somehow that we can pick up on? So there may be no survival of death whatsoever, but the mind is so powerful, it creates a memory bank somewhere. You know, we've got radio waves and EMF and ultraviolet. Is there a psi field? In biology,
You're speaking my language,
biology, they call it a
Professor.
morphic field, and you know, we could talk of all kinds of fields of information. Is it that? Is it?
That's John's theory. That's what John always believes is our spirits. It's our memories that were attached to the energy of us that's released, because we don't really know how the mind
Mrs.
works.
Garrett, Eileen Garrett, there, towards the end of her life, she didn't believe. She was a world famous medium, very, very rich, founded the Parapsychology Foundation in America in 1951. She'd moved over there and funded a lot of research. And by the end of her life, she believed more so that a lot of her information was telepathic. It was coming from the sitters. She was picking up on the bereaved's knowledge, or whoever she was working with, their knowledge of the dead. And that's why it seemed so impressive. She wasn't communicating with the dead.
Fascinating. And I like what you said about being specific. You know, it's as specific as you get. I did an interview with a woman named Simone Key she used to be a tutor at the Arthur Findlay College. And she would say they had a word called, I loved it. It was like clairvagueness as opposed to clairvoyance.
Yeah.
You know, like that's what you got to watch for, clairvagueness. That's how you can spot a fraud. You know, like they're just giving you the big, broad things, and
and not the details.
Yeah, without the details. Professor, I got one more question for you, and I'll let you go. You've been absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you. We appreciate it so much. If you received one of these calls, what's the first question you would ask?
Who's calling, please? Who is it from? And that's the thing. If it's just some random dead person, I wouldn't really be able to help.
Well, let's assume it's somebody you know. Let's assume it would be someone you knew that had passed, someone you were close to, and they had passed, and you get a phone call from them. What would you ask?
Then I'd say you need to make me convinced. Give me some specific information that only I would know, that you would know. So it's got to be something like that. I mean, there could be a few things. So
you'd hit him from the science. You'd hit him right out of the gate.
It can't be a celebrity, because there'd be so many people that'd be able to impersonate them, and what is publicly known. So it's either got to be a dead relative or one of the scientists past that I know of. I mean, it could be Rogo or Bayliss as well. You know, if they came forward, I would know so much about them because I've delved so much into their own personal history that, you know, there's questions that I could ask. So I would put them to the challenge of, this is great, you know, please stay on the line. I would like to actually have this conversation, but we need to go through some specifics here and make sure that we're actually genuinely establishing content. You know, there was Konstantin Raudover. Have you heard of him? Because of Breakthrough, the book Breakthrough.
No.
That was considered a really big book in the progress of the history of EVP. And Dr. Konstantin Raudover was a psychologist, and when he brought out the book Breakthrough, it came with an LP. So you could listen to his EVPs as you read the book to hear these examples.
No, that's cool.
And after he died, there were claims in Germany, France, and the USA that he was repeatedly calling paranormal researchers to actually say, I'm on the other side and we're creating a telephone to contact the living, and you need to document these cases. I think the guy in America was called Mark Macy, and he'd written a few things on this, and he's got these recordings. And I remember kind of facing them with quite a bit of skepticism of, this is unusual. It sounds like someone impersonating Raudover. I mean, he's got this very deep voice with the accent and so forth, but over and over again. And Mark spoke very positively about them, and, you know, absolutely head on involved with trying to understand this contact. So yeah, there's even been these figures who did the research returning allegedly afterwards and trying to get in touch with.
It was like Houdini. It wasn't like Houdini's thing. He gave someone a word.
Like, yeah, he died with a code, and allegedly the medium that he had kind of outed the most and spoke so negatively about was Arthur Ford. And Arthur Ford was the first medium to claim that he got the code, and apparently it was the code that Houdini had died with. Right. And so there's the controversy there, but that goes on and on and on. I mean, that you see, God, I've got so many things in, like, there's a little orange book there, and that's a book.
First of all, that's the most impressive thing, that you're able to quickly point to the book.
I can see it, but I know it's there. That book is by Hereward Carrington, and it's just called Houdini and Doyle, and it's about the relationship and the back and forth between Houdini and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And it's not as straightforward as some of the people online make out, that Doyle was deluded and Houdini got it right. There was a lot of personal loss with Houdini and his mother, and especially wasn't satisfied unless a medium came forward with a message from his mother. You know, so that really pushes out the window any other kind of contact from other people that could be verified. Right. It sounds like Conan Doyle was staying quite level-headed, that any medium should really just be presenting satisfactory information. But eventually they fell out, but they really were a good working team. But you had to really push those personal kind of losses and biases out of the way. And I don't think they could reconcile those. And it's the same with Freud and Jung, how they went their separate ways. Sure. Both ended up being fascinating parapsychology, but they really ended up kind of destroying their friendship.
Hopefully that won't happen to us, John.
Yeah, hopefully not, right? But hey, you know, what's really interesting is like, it's funny because I deal with in my field, if you will, with so much. I'm trying to think of the right word for it. Like, for example, you said it before, like all of a sudden a bird flies by or a butterfly goes by, and people are like, oh, it's a spirit. And I'm like, no, it's nature. You know, that's just a butterfly going by, right? So when I'm doing my thing, and I am also super skeptical of the apps that I use for not only human tampering, but human error. Okay, audio pareidolia, things like that. The chaos that you speak of, because that chaos is everywhere while I do this, even if I'm walking in a cemetery. But there's certain things I ask and it falls short. A lot of people don't realize it. When I go up to like a plot and I ask for, you know, spirits, may we have a conversation? You know, I get a reply. Yes. Okay, spirit, what's your name? You know, without saying the spirit's name. You know, the app in question that I'm using is on my wrist, usually pointed up at the sky, you know, or in back of me. You know, it's not at the grave, so there's no visual context to the phone either. You know, and then a name comes through. You know, that's the sort of viable evidence that I look at. And that is why usually if I don't hear a name or it's some nonsense, you know, I just keep it moving, because it's all, you know, it's regardless whether it's something coming through, whether it's radio or whether it's, you know, something else, it's not viable to what I'm doing at the time. You know, it holds no worth to me. So, but it's just everything you were saying, just like, you know, it's it's great to know that I'm applying those, tactics to
That
what
you're
I
not
do.
totally 100% crazy. Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying? It's great to
exactly.
know that
I'm
you're
not
not a
completely
complete
100%
lunatic.
crazy.
That there are people studied and learned that are doing it in a much different way and not in
Yes.
field work like you are. But yes, it's great, man. It really is. Wow, dude,
Professor, thank you so much. I
we
mean,
kept
you
it for over
listen,
an hour. I
such
hope
an
you had
amazing
fun
guest.
and
Thank
had a
you.
good time here.
And Brian, you too, man. Thank you
yeah.
for
Yeah,
all
thanks,
that,
Brian.
man. Thank you.
Professor Cal Cooper, everybody. Telephone calls from the dead. Pick it up. We'll put a link to it in our bios here for this when we drop this. That's it, man. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
appreciate
Hopefully, I will be doing an audio version of the book soon. People have been kind of poking me and nudging me like mad to do it, so soon there'll be. You can go to sleep listening to the book chapter by chapter, hopefully.
Yeah, man.
Cool.
That's who wouldn't want to listen to this voice? Make sure you got a picture on there. Have it read to you at night. It's
I
like
can be in bed with you at night, and
it's
just
just like in a
talk to
bath.
you.
That's it.
Like reading. It's like who wouldn't want to be serenade-ish, gentlemen? Awesome. Anyway, all right, man. Thank you so much. So how do we explain the voice message from Brian's mother who passed away? Technical glitches like delayed delivery, voicemail sync issues, or even phone number reassignments can sometimes bring old messages back to life. There's also the slim chance of a heartless prank. Psychologically, grief and memory can play tricks on us, but in Brian's case, the evidence would rule out both grief-driven perception and mistaken identity. Is it paranormal? A spirit manipulating electronics or sending messages through residual energy? Maybe. Either way, we are left with a mystery. Was it a fluke of technology or something more? At Splintered Spirits, we like to think it's something more. We want to once again thank Professor Callum Cooper for joining us and Brian for sharing such a personal story. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to Splintered Spirits wherever you get your podcasts and on all our socials. If you have a ghost story or evidence that you want us to review, visit our website at splinteredspirits.com to submit. That's splinteredspirits.com. Until next time, stay curious.